The House is resumed. Madam Chairperson.
Mr Speaker, I'm directed by the committee to obtain a ruling from you on the admissibility of the Minister's amendment to list projects in Schedule 2 as set out on Amendment Paper 238. Mr Speaker, when commencing the debate on Part 1, I informed the committee that Schedule 2 is debatable. With that part, I told the committee that the Minister's amendment to the schedule is out of order, as in the nature of private legislation. This is because many of the projects are listed under authorised persons in a private capacity, and the legislative effect would appear to be of benefit to the specified persons, which would differ from other persons who apply under the bill or fast-track approval. On that basis, I informed the committee that the amendment was out of order. A point of order has been raised, and I have been asked to obtain your ruling on this matter now.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Won't surprise members that I've done a great deal of thinking about this particular issue, as it's been on the cards for a number of days. I want to, at the outset, thank the clerk for the advice that he has provided, and acknowledge the chairperson for her taking that advice and presenting it to the House. In the end, though, a decision about this lies with me as Speaker. I thank members for their contributions to this particular debate. And if I was to summarise it, it is in favour of policy on one side and the favour of precedent on the other. Generally, it's the role of the judiciary to decide how law applies to particular cases. It is undesirable in principle for Parliament to make law that is only for the benefit of specific private persons. Where the House does consider such law, it does so carefully. We would not want to permit a situation where members and ministers could simply propose bills and amendments to benefit particular private interests without proper scrutiny under the House's rules. The issue here centres on what it means for a provision or amendment to be private legislation. There are three tests to apply. If the answer to all three questions is yes, then the proposed provision is private legislation and should not be included in a government bill. The first question is, does the proposed provision affect a particular person or body in a private capacity? Clearly, this is not the case where the entity concerned is a public body. If the provision affects a private entity but relates to a public function carried out by that entity, then that may be a matter that can be dealt with in a government bill. There are clearly some persons listed in the Minister's amendment that are affected in a private capacity. It's worth noting, though, that there is virtually no bill passed in this House that doesn't have some private benefit, or at least have it claimed to be part of its legislative arrangements. The second question is, does the proposed provision affect the person or body, but not affect all others belonging to the same category or class? Under the bill, a person listed in Schedule 2 would be affected differently from the rest of the very broad category of persons who may apply for fast-track approval. That being that they are in the schedule, others need to come to the Minister to seek approval to get on that fast track. The third question is, does the proposed provision have a legislative effect that gives rise to a particular benefit or interest to a person or body? I agree with the Chairperson's assessment that there could be a beneficial effect from being listed in Schedule 2. However, this legislative effect needs to be considered in the broader context of the bill. On one hand, a listed project would not need to go through the initial process of applying and being considered for referral under the bill, and would not be subject to the same criteria as a referred project. On the other hand, if the Minister's amendment to Part 2 were adopted, I should add too that we'll just go back a little bit and say considered for referral under the bill and would not be subject to the same criteria as a referred project. Those referred projects listed in the bill have been through a process, although that is not something the House can consider. On the other hand, the Minister's amendments to Part 2 were adopted. If the Minister's amendments to Part 2 were adopted, a listed project would still need to undergo a substantive application process with a number of requirements in common with any other referred project. Approval for the project could still be declined or conditions imposed as for a referred project. It differs in some ways to some of the points that are made quite correctly by members of the opposition, where the argument seems to be that from the government, that a bill should be able to benefit a particular private entity directly as a matter of public policy. That is not unusual. This is not a sustainable position, though, in reference to Standing Order 2571, to a matter of public policy, make a distinction between that sphere and matters that are of interest to or benefit to particular persons. It is what is meant by the interest or benefit to a particular person that is the issue here. When looking at admissibility, the presiding officer considered the text of the proposed legislation without regard to process carried out within the executive branch. That is appropriate. The fact that the government deems the proposal to be a matter of public policy is not the presiding officer's concern. Subject to standing orders, the presiding officer treats all legislative proposals the same way, whether they are put forward by a minister or another member. I therefore consider, with all the remarks that have been made, taken in the context of the other amendments set out on Amendment Paper 241, the legislative effects would not be sufficiently clear as to give rise to a particular benefit for an authorised person for a listed project, as distinct from a referred project. On that basis, I'm not satisfied that the Minister's amendment to Schedule 2 would fail the third test, as I've set out. It's finely balanced, but that is my conclusion. Depending on the amendments agreed by the committee before reaching Schedule 2, my view is that the Minister's amendment to Schedule 2, set out on Amendment Paper 241, is admissible. However, on account of the potential beneficial effects the amendment may confer, the chairperson would be justified in allowing a more considered and lengthy discussion in the committee stages. I declare the House in committee for further consideration of the bill.